Well, today I want to pick up where we left off. We were in verse 20 of chapter 2 of Colossians, and Paul was talking about Christ's purpose to reconcile us to the Father. And so he died on the cross and was resurrected for that essential purpose, to lead us to reconciliation and also redemption. But the thing that's interesting to me is he goes on, he said, but he did it with three specific objectives in mind. Why did he reconcile me? And he says the first one was to present you, that is, to present you to God the Father. And he wants to present us in a way that's really, really kind of wonderful. Because, when you're introduced to somebody, we always talk about trying to put the best foot forward, or to, help us to look the best we can and shine in the best light. And every one of us had those experiences where we didn't do that. We didn't come across real smooth, real good, real smart, real flattering. And so we feel that awkwardness. And so the very idea that Christ is going to present me to the Father, the Father in his glory is going to be so great. Aren't I going to sit there and go, don't look at me and don't gaze upon me, and certainly don't fry me like a fritter. And he says, but what he came was to take away any of that kind of sense of self-hatred and self-abnegation, and instead to present us to the Father. First and foremost, he says, holy in his sight. Hagios, the word that's used here, literally means to make you sacred. That is, that you're physically pure, you're morally pure, that you're ethically blameless, that religiously or spiritually speaking, you're correct, you're consecrated. That, in fact, it's the very term that was used to describe the believers. Literally, they were called saints. They were. That's where the word saint comes from, and from the original Greek meaning of hagios, which means that we are a sacred being. And I know that it's in the liturgical traditions, they have this sainthood thing that they go through with various individuals. When I was growing up, St. Christopher was a saint, and then came along one day, they decided that he wasn't a saint anymore. And I didn't even know how that works. Popes who are infallible shouldn't be able to get those kind of things wrong, but who am I to judge anyway? But basically, the idea that Jesus is yearning to present us to the Father in a way in which he'll look at us and see us as sacred and as pure and as holy as Jesus himself is. God, who so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so loves me in my redemptive state that he gives me that same sonship. That Jesus will always be the older brother, but we're one of the family members now. And the Father sees us as that way. And in some ways, in my mind, I admit, it becomes incomprehensible. I can't imagine standing before the God that Isaiah said he was standing before, and all he felt was uncleanness. And yet Jesus said, when I present you to my Father, it's going to be with holiness. And there's nothing that you need to be ashamed of. There's nothing about you that's going to be unflattering. Secondly, he said he wants to present us without blemish. And that's really talking about more of the internal. Amomos is the idea that you're morally without blemish and faultless and unblameable. In other words, your thought life has nothing that needs to be removed or hidden. And there again, you and I sit there and saying, man, my thoughts many times go in some very strange and unhealthy directions. And how is that going to happen? And yet, in that renewal of the resurrection, there is going to be something that happens to us where, as the way I always put it, the lust of my flesh will be to do the will of God. The most driving passion of my flesh, my redeemed flesh, will be to please God in everything that I do and everything I say. And that's why when you begin to realize that that's where it comes, it's going to end up one day, that there's a certain desire and anxiousness, kind of the fear of death, or as Paul called it, the sting of death, begins to dissipate, and you begin to realize that death is going to be that great moment of freedom for me, where the things that I battle now as a follower of Christ, the idea that I see myself as being impure and not pure, the fact that I feel like my thoughts condemn me, that won't happen anymore. That there will be just this clarity and this freedom and this wonderfulness of being filled with the pleasure of being who God has created me to be. that suddenly, and this is really kind of a break point for a lot of us, because some of us are going through life trying to figure out, so what is my purpose and why I'm here? And the answer may not make you happy immediately, but the answer is not to help you find your best life now, but to live your life in a way so that you can go to heaven and then experience what you were really created for. And may take a little bit of a paradigm shift, but I tell you, it changes the way you look at your life and the way you plan your life and the way you interact with the world around you. That when you go through certain losses in your life, it's not the end of the world. You realize that, no, this is part of the process. And there's things there's loss and there's disappointment and there's all sorts of heartbreak and things that happen in life, but one thing I came to a realization several years ago was I put it this way, that everything that hurts me will eventually heal me. And everything that humbles me will always end up helping me. And so hurt and humbling are two things that by fleshly nature tries to avoid and navigate around so I don't have to really deal with it. And yet I find sometimes God brings me into a situation where I can't avoid it. I'm going to get hurt and I'm going to be humiliated. And yet when you begin to realize that those are the very things that God uses, those are part of the toolkit that he has to bring me into greater conformity with his greater will, that God lifts up the humble. He resists people who are proud. So when God humbles me, he's drawing me closer, not pushing me away. And when I begin to feel hurt, I become more dependent upon him for comfort because I can't find it in this life. And there again, what does that do? That draws me closer to him. So he wants to present us as holy in his sight. He wants to present us without any kind of those moral, ethical blemishes that are so much of the human experience. But thirdly, he wants to present us so that he says we are free from accusation. And that's really talking about the accusations that come from the outside. Anaglatos, this Greek word here, is really interesting because it signifies, if I quote one commentator, a lexicon, it says, it signifies that which cannot be called to account. And it says, with nothing laid to one's charge as a result of a public investigation. And the idea of a public investigation is where you're being interrogated and your life's being torn apart and investigators are looking at things and they're accusing you of all these nefarious things. He says, you'll be in this place where there will be no basis for that. They can dig all they want. There's nothing to be found. And I love the way Vine puts it in his expository dictionary. He says, it implies not merely acquittal, but the absence of even a charge or accusation against a person. In other words, it's not just simply that we know you're guilty, but we're going to acquit you. It means that we have removed all the evidence. We have destroyed all the evidence. When Christ died on the cross, he destroyed all the evidence of your guilt and all of your failings. It was destroyed by his resurrection, or his death on the cross. And the proof of it is in the resurrection that follows afterwards. So when we begin to look at ourselves, and we oftentimes you and I get caught up in the world of regrets. We look back on things and we think, oh, if this hadn't happened or that hadn't happened. Or if we're not blaming ourselves, we're usually blaming somebody else. If they hadn't done this to me, then I would be here and this would happen and they hindered me there and that, all that kind of stuff. The blaming goes on. None of that is relevant. God says you have to understand that when God looks at you, he removes all the evidence. He destroys all the evidence. There's nothing here to convict you. It's more effective than Hillary Clinton bleach-bitten her hard drives and smashing her cell phones. I mean, there's not even a broken cell phone or a washed computer, a hard drive to be found on the planet of all the things that you've said and done wrong in your life. And so you have been released because there's absolutely no evidence on which to charge you of a crime. That's why I love the way that Paul puts it later in Colossians 2:20 further on. And he says, so since you died with Christ to the basic principles of this world, why as though you still belong to it, do you submit to it? But we're out of time. And so I'm going to pick that up tomorrow and we'll kind of end our conversation this week by finishing out this last portion of the second chapter of Colossians. Until then, many blessings in Jesus' name.